Brad, your most recent story is about how the Drug Enforcement Administration regularly mines Americans' travel information to profile certain people who they think might be ferrying money for narcotics traffickers. But some of these itineraries are seemingly kind of benign. And here's the kicker. They almost never use what they learn to make arrests or build criminal cases. Brad, where did your idea for this story come from?
Sure. So I was reading some of these civil cases where the government has sued money, $35,000, $40,000. They're fascinating cases. And I saw a couple of them where they had these vague references to, the DEA learned or an informant told us that so-and-so was traveling from this place to California on a one-way ticket, and this was a suspicious itinerary, so we went and talked to them at the airport and asked them a bunch of questions. And, I started just building, I started taping them to my wall because I kept seeing more and more of these. And then it kind of became clear what was going on. There's a privacy piece of this, which is a weird thing to think about in an airport, right? Because they are literally like looking under your clothes with that machine.
Right.
And then there's the seizure side of it, which happens a lot, is sort of known. It happens on the highway all the time. And where this comes together, where this is different for us, is that they are using your travel information in ways that even the airlines are not comfortable with and didn't know about. And they're doing it to get money. And it's a lot of money.
Yeah. How much?
We don't know exactly. I mean, it's hard to ascribe dollar values just to this particular practice, but we know from Justice Department forfeiture records, from their accounting records, that there are DEA groups assigned to 15 major airports. That's actually an undercount, but those groups in the past decade have seized $200 million in cash.
And in your story, you say it's all major airlines and Amtrak.
Yeah, we've seen examples of the DEA profiling passengers on Southwest Airlines, American, United, JetBlue, every major carrier and Amtrak. So clearly they have some ability to get into the passenger information for those companies and pick out people whose itineraries they think are suspicious.
And another thing you note is that some of these itineraries are seemingly quite benign.
They seem kind of like my itineraries sometimes. A short notice trip to California where you don't stay very long. I've done that. They have looked for people who have bought one-way tickets, who have paid for tickets in cash, who have turned around quickly, who may be bringing a bag on a quick turnaround trip. There's a list of things they look for, and then one common feature is that these are almost always people whose destination is California or someplace else near the southwest border. And in the court filings that come with these, they describe those as source cities for narcotics or major narcotics distribution area. I mean, there's a lot of language they use to describe why going to California is suspicious.
And you profile someone named Christelle Tillerson who was going to California, and they seized $25,000 from her.
Yeah, they approached her at the airport in Detroit. They had a tip that she was traveling to California on a one-way ticket. So they asked if they could search her bags, and she answered their questions, and they searched her bags and found $25,000 in cash. And they ended up seizing the money from her. They never charged her with a crime. Her lawyer said they never even questioned her about her ties to drug traffickers, so it's not like they were trying to turn her as a good informant to work their way up to the bigger fish. They let her go. They gave her a receipt. She got on a later flight out to Los Angeles. She eventually got back $21,000 after going to federal court. Because she was able to prove that her boyfriend had taken it out of his Postal Service 401k so that she could buy a semi-truck in California.
And it's amazing that she didn't get all of the money back and had to fight so hard to get it back.
That's a common thing. And nobody has ever been able to give us any rhyme or reason about the dollar values that get returned. In a lot of cases, if somebody challenges it, you get part of the money back. And I've always had this question, and the Justice Department hasn't really answered it, of why would you give some of it back, right? If you think this is money that's going to the Sinaloa cartel and you have some evidence of that, you probably shouldn't give any of it back. And if you think it's not, then I don't understand why you don't give all of it back.
There's something about it that just appears that they know this comes off as unethical.
I don't know if it's that. I mean, there's been a lot of attention lately on this is a practice known as civil asset forfeiture, where the government can take assets, cash, jewelry, houses, cars, whatever that it believes are linked to crime, if it has some evidence, without necessarily ever having to prosecute the person who it belongs to. There's been a lot of suggestion, a lot of criticism in recent years that especially local police are using this authority as a way to make money instead of improving public safety. The DEA says that's not what they're doing. They don't actually get to keep. It's not like the agents keep the money. They think if you don't, the way you hurt these criminal organizations is to take away their profit, and one of the ways they move profit is couriers on airlines. In the scheme of the Sinaloa cartel or the major trafficking organizations, it's probably not a ton of money. But they do see a strategic reason for it.
You have a spokesman at the end of your story say that DEA's airport groups have done a lot more than seize cash. They've arrested drug trafficking rings that infiltrated the airlines and used their badges to help carry large quantities of drugs past security checkpoints and onto commercial flights.
Yeah, oh no, these airport groups are not just exclusively profiling people based on their travel records, right? They do actually make some big significant cases because there are still people who take cash and organizations that move cash, illicit cash, drug money, on airplanes because it's not illegal to move, to take $30,000 in your suitcase. It might not be a good idea, but it's not illegal. It is maybe if it's drug money. It's a whole different thing now with the whole, after September 11th, the amount of security at an airport that you go through to get on an airplane is phenomenal. So it's a whole different thing to start moving quantities of drugs through a TSA checkpoint. That doesn't happen so much anymore. But they do have these cases where some of the trafficking organizations will try to compromise airport employees so that they can get around the checkpoint. And once they can get around the checkpoint and get things into the sort of sterile areas of the airport and onto planes without having to go through that, it becomes a much better way to move drugs. So that still happens. And it still happens to some extent, individual couriers trying to smuggle something into the United States aboard a plane. But that's not what DEA is looking at with profiling passengers. These are almost always domestic flights. They're someplace in the United States, usually headed to California.
Is it possible that this agency is seizing this cash as a way to generate revenue?
I talked to two former group supervisors who ran airport groups for DEA, and both of them told me that a principal motivation for going after these cash couriers was because they needed to generate money not for DEA but for the local police departments that serve on DEA task forces at the airport, that those departments depend on money from seized assets as part of their budget.
And Brad, you even told me that they plan for it in their budget, so they have to continue this practice.
I don't know how much it's hard to know how much they plan for it, but they, we were told they count on it, that this is a dependable revenue source for some of those departments. And some of them have gotten a fair amount of money out of it. Of the $200 or so million in cash seizures we've seen at airports, the majority of it went to local police departments, and like hundreds of local police departments.
Is that illegal?
No, that's totally consistent. That's how the federal law works. There's a federal asset seizure law that allows the government, if an agent can demonstrate or the government can demonstrate probable cause to think this money is tied to drugs or some other illegal activity, they can seize it. And you can challenge it in federal court if you want, and it's a civil case, and they're really interesting civil cases because they're almost always, United States versus $35,000 in cash. The government has to sue the cash, and you can come in and claim the cash, and as long as the government can show by a preponderance of the evidence, which is not this, it's the lowest possible standard that's used in court. It's the same one in like a personal injury case, that the money is linked to crime, the government's going to keep the money.
In your research of the story, did you talk to anyone who found this practice to be unethical?
There are a lot of people who have concerns about this from a privacy standpoint, where it's one thing for the government to be looking at our travel information and kind of profiling people so that they can stop terrorists from blowing up airplanes. There's
But that's really a different group than the
yes.
DEA, right?
At this point, there is, I think, broad acceptance that the government can do that sort of thing in the name of safety. Not everybody loves it, but almost everybody, I think, accepts it. But this is different from that. So we heard some criticism that said, it's one thing if you're going to do this to prevent terrorism. It's another thing if you're going to do it for drug prosecutions. And this isn't even drug prosecutions. This is just taking drug money or potential drug money. So there's that. There are concerns within the airlines about their employees turning over airline records to the DEA in ways the airlines themselves would not. The airlines told us pretty consistently that they won't turn over passenger records without a court order or a subpoena or something like that, which is not how the DEA has been doing it. They've been using networks of informants. I
was thinking about how Christelle Tillerson said that she wanted to use that money to buy a truck, right?
Yeah. Well, and so I think that gets to a question of, are they getting the wrong people, right? Like there are countless now civil forfeiture horror stories where the government has taken cash from somebody who was really doing nothing wrong, and the process for getting it back is so onerous that you basically have to go into court and fight to get your money back and hire a lawyer to do it at your own expense. And a lot of people just don't even do that. So there's that. And Christelle Tillerson was suspicious to the DEA for a lot of reasons, right? She had a marijuana trafficking conviction. She had served time in federal prison. She had a one-way ticket to Los Angeles. She didn't seem to have a lot of other money of her own, so what's she doing with $25,000 in her bag? Didn't
you write that the cash smelled like drugs?
Yes. One of the things they do is they will have a drug dog come and smell the money, and if the dog alerts to the presence of narcotics on the money, that's another bit of evidence they can use to justify a seizure. The problem with that is there's sort of growing acceptance that a lot of money has drug residue on it, not just the money that's been lately in the hands of a drug trafficker.
Okay.
So it's not ironclad.
Right.
But it's all these pieces that come together to give them this sort of piece of the puzzle. And Christelle Tillerson told them where this money came from, but I don't think she had her boyfriend's 401k withdrawal slip on her at the time.
Right, because it was her boyfriend's retirement fund.
Yeah, so they kept the money until I think it took a year and a half for her to through the federal court in Michigan, get the money back. Now, it's hard to know how many people in this situation really are kind of innocent owners who just happen to be traveling with a lot of money, and how many are very suspicious. I mean, we also saw a woman in California who the DEA approached her at the airport and, asked if she had packed her own bag because they'd had a dog sniff her bag and the dog alerted to her bag. And she said, no, my aunt packed the bag. And they said, well, what's your aunt's last name? And she didn't know. And then they asked why she was traveling to Tulsa, and she said to visit her sick aunt. And they asked, what's that aunt's last name? And she didn't know that aunt's last name either. So they were pretty suspicious about her at this point.
Right. And then they found $41,000 stuffed in her suitcase in envelopes in a toiletry bag.
Yes.
And a pair of white tube socks, according to court records, as you wrote, Brad.
Yes. And they did not return that money. But they also, she gave them permission to search her cell phone. They had suspicion, at least, that this was drug money. But she was never charged. She was never prosecuted for any of this. She was given a receipt for the money and let go.
I think the text message that you wrote about that said her reason for travel was money, baby, money.
Yeah.
Had to look a certain way, too. But it's just so interesting that nothing happened and the money was taken.
Yes.
And she declined to comment in your story.
The only case we've seen where they brought federal criminal charges out, in one of these cash seizures at an airport was a woman who was already under federal investigation for money laundering and happened to be, carrying cash through an airport during this ongoing federal investigation.
Would you recommend to friends and family not to travel with tons of cash?
Well, yeah, but for different reasons. But I've been surprised in this at to hear the explanations for having cash and, people who don't have access to the banking system or who have really poor credit or It's not something I conceive of all the time because a savings account seems like a kind of basic thing to me, or a checking account or something, but that's not a uniform experience. And so it's worth wondering whether the profile that DEA has, is skewed toward people like, to think people like me are more normal, that I pay for an airline ticket with a credit card and don't carry cash. I don't know. But carrying $25,000 through the airport is probably not the best idea. But then again, these are all, for the most part, voluntary encounters with the DEA. These were all people who, when the DEA came up to them and asked, "Can we talk to you?" were free to say no.
Brad, do you have a sense of how many people, I'll ask you two questions, how many people get caught into the crosshairs of the DEA searching, and then how many people actually have their cash seized from them? Do you have any sense of a number?
It's impossible to answer either one of those questions for the simple reason that they don't really get recorded. So there was an Inspector General report about the DEA's conduct at airports a little while ago. And one of the critiques they had was that the DEA wasn't really making a record when they went and talked to somebody but didn't make an arrest or seizure. So we don't know what that pool of people is. And we also don't know what's the pool of people from whom they made a seizure, but then it wasn't challenged in court, on the basis of these suspicious itineraries. Because, again, the seizure only ends up reported in federal court if you challenge it and say, no, that's my money, it's innocent money, and I want it back.
Brad, thank you so much for joining me in the podcast studio at USA Today to talk about your fascinating story.
My pleasure.
Supreme Court rejects guilty until proven innocent, says states cannot keep money from the innocent. With so many constitutional rights under siege, it's welcome news when one of them is defended. Reaffirming the presumption of innocence, the U.S. Supreme Court struck down a Colorado law last month that forced criminal defendants to prove their innocence when the defendant's convictions were already overturned. As the court explained, absent those convictions, Colorado would have no legal right to exact and retain petitioners' funds. Not only is this decision a win for due process, the court's ruling in Nelson v. Colorado could have major ramifications for government shakedown schemes nationwide. The case arose after two defendants, Shannon Nelson and Lewis Madden, were convicted for sexual offenses and ordered to pay thousands of dollars in court costs, fees, and restitution. Between her conviction and later acquittal, the state withheld $702 from Nelson's inmate account, while Madden paid Colorado $1,977 after his conviction. When their convictions were overturned, Nelson and Madden demanded their money back. Although a state appellate court sided with them, the Colorado Supreme Court denied their refund request. Instead, the court ruled that Nelson and Madden could reclaim their money only through the state's Exoneration Act, which requires filing a civil claim and proving that the person was actually innocent of the crime for which he or she was convicted. Allowing that ruling to stand would fly in the face of centuries of Western legal traditions. As the Institute for Justice, a public interest law firm, noted in an amicus brief, the presumption of innocence has deep historical roots and can be traced back not only through American jurisprudence but through English common law, Roman law, and even to the Pentateuch. Moreover, that presumption is a critical safeguard against a justice system where individuals can be subjected to arbitrary and irrational deprivations of their liberty and property. Fortunately, the U.S. Supreme Court, in a 7-1 ruling, ruled Colorado's law was unconstitutional. Writing for the majority, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg held that the Exoneration Act's scheme does not comport with the 14th Amendment's guarantee of due process. Nelson and Madden are entitled to be presumed innocent and should not be saddled with any proof burden to regain what is rightfully theirs. Ginsburg forcefully rejected Colorado's argument that the presumption of innocence applies only at criminal trials, and not to civil claims, as under the Exoneration Act, Colorado may not presume a person, adjudged guilty of no crime, nonetheless guilty enough for monetary exactions. Armed with this ruling, the Nelson decision may set an important precedent to rein in another abusive civil proceeding, civil forfeiture. The parallels are striking. Through civil forfeiture, law enforcement can confiscate and keep cash, cars, and real estate without securing a criminal conviction or filing charges against the owner. Perversely, under civil forfeiture, even those found not guilty in criminal court can still forfeit their property in civil court, since the latter has a lower standard of proof. According to the Institute for Justice, under civil forfeiture proceedings in over 30 states and on the federal level, the burden of proof is on the property owner, not the government. So when police seize someone's property, the owner must prove they did not know of or consent to their property being used for an alleged criminal activity. That turns the presumption of innocence straight on its head. Although civil forfeiture sounds like a clear-cut violation of many constitutional rights, courts have repeatedly upheld civil forfeiture schemes. For instance, in 2014, the Texas Supreme Court refused to hear a case involving a 2004 Chevrolet Silverado belonging to Zahir El Ali. Ali had previously sold the Chevy but still held title to it and it was registered in his name. When the buyer was arrested for a DWI and drug possession, police seized the truck and filed a civil forfeiture action against it, even though Ali was not involved. In order to regain his Chevy, Ali was asked to prove his innocence. Represented by the Institute for Justice, Ali made claims very similar to the arguments by Nelson and Madden. By imposing an unconstitutional burden on innocent owners, Texas civil forfeiture law violated his right to due process. In a strident dissent from not taking the case, Justice Don Willett highlighted the injustice inherent in the system. Criminals in our legal system enjoy a presumption of innocence, requiring government to prove their guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. But property owners are actually treated worse, presumed guilty, and required to prove their innocence. Fortunately, reform is on the march. Today, 12 states require a criminal conviction for most or all forfeiture cases, while Utah has banned forfeiting property from the acquitted. For innocent owner claims, New Hampshire and Ohio have also shifted the burden of proof for proving knowledge or consent of illegal activity onto the government. In Congress, the FAIR Act by Senator Rand Paul and the Due Process Act by Representative Jim Sensenbrenner would both reform federal forfeiture laws so that property owners are innocent until proven guilty. And Justice Clarence Thomas, the lone dissenter in the Nelson decision, recently slammed civil forfeiture for its egregious and well-chronicled abuses. If judges can be as engaged as the U.S. Supreme Court was in Nelson, civil forfeiture will not be long for this world. Or as Justice Willett so eloquently put it, our Constitution was written precisely to prevent carte blanche assertions of governmental power, to prevent police power from devolving into police state.
Hey Charlotte County, this is Charlotte County COPWATCH, and I wanted to explain what fair use is. You can use pieces of news articles if you're doing it for news reporting, you have commentary, and you're doing it for education purposes. So that's what fair use is, as you can see right here. Another reason why I wanted to make this video is to let you know I have just joined with Patreon. A nice thing with Patreon, I make no money on YouTube. They took the money away years ago, and so this is another way to give, and it's a nice thing too because you can give monthly. You can give $1, $5, $10, whatever. I do 4 to 5 hours a day on trying to wake the sheep up on how corrupt it is and different ways that you can fight the corruption. So Patreon is a way that you can do it, and then of course the old way is still there. Donate to Charlotte County COPWATCH with PayPal or credit card. So keep that in mind. 4 to 5 hours a day. I make no money, but the corruption happened to me and I'm sick of it, so I'm trying to wake people up. But my wife would love it if if we could get some help out there. There's 47,000 subscribers. Just think if each one of you subscribers just gave let's say actually yes, $1 a month. 47,000 subscribers gave $1 a month. That would be awesome. That's not going to happen. But anyways, that would be great if it did happen. But, you know, do the math in your head. Just think about it. Like I said, 4 to 5 hours a day. I get no money from YouTube. YouTube has gone nuts. You can't do anything anymore. They're taking the money away everywhere. So these are a couple different ways that you can still help out with all this time that I put in. And as you know, I'm in a special situation where, you know, at least I can do it. You know, 4 to 5 hours a day. We have a cleaning company during the day. That's what allows me to do this, and we're debt free. So this is my hobby. I don't go fishing and all that other crap. I try to save the world. So help me out to make the wife happy, man. In fact, if you guys did give $1 a day, and there was 47,000 of you, and you did it, and each of you gave $1, and that was every month, oh my God, yes, I could quit. I could start suing them. Another idea, too, that we have is, you know, if I got, you know, some funds, we could actually contact everyone that has been ticketed and or arrested and put in jail and start sending them postcards to let them know we're here and to see if everything went all right, and if it didn't, find out their story. So we could even do more investigations and more lawsuits. Lawsuits take money. So just think about that. You know, 47,000 of you so far right now. You know, $1 a day. I mean, $1 a month on Patreon, or $5 a month Patreon, 10, 20, whatever. Just do the math in your head. Help out. This is a lot of work every single day. Thanks.